The end of an era. Lorraine Thomas has moved out of Wittenoom, the last remaining resident. There are still a number of houses in the town, but there are no services in Wittenoom. There haven't been for years. Lorraine's been without a phone for some time. She's lived there for 40 years. She's now aged 80, and we believe she's now has moved to Headland with her family. Melita Markey is the CEO of the Asbestos CEO Society of Australia. Melita, thanks for talking to us. The end of a somewhat dark era in Australian mining and West Australian history.
It is. But it's really not the end, is it? Because, the place is still on the map. It's still highly contaminated. It's still highly accessible by four-wheel drive. And it's a very beautiful and attractive region.
Yep. On the edge of
Australia.
Yeah, on the edge of those beautiful ranges. It's right at the gateway to Karajini National Park as well, Melita. So there's lots of traffic to and from the area.
And surrounded by heavy industry.
Yep.
Roads. Yeah. So it's definitely still on the books. But yes, we finally managed to stop people actually domiciling there.
Have you ever met Lorraine, Melita? Ever chatted to Lorraine?
No, I haven't.
Yeah,
I haven't.
I met her a few years ago, and she was a councillor, because that area is still a part of the Shire of Ashburton, and she was a councillor for many years, and she was a nice person, very strong in her opinions and her convictions, and had important family laid to rest in the area as well. What is your understanding of what will happen with Wittenoom now?
Well, look, we've got no real understanding because with the change in the ministry, we haven't had a meeting with the new Lands Minister. Prior to that, we were in discussions with the former Minister, Mr Tony Buddy, and also with the former Treasurer, Mr Ben Wyatt, and he was making some significant moves, he told us, in looking at how to remediate some of the issues in Wittenoom with some of the people responsible. So for that situation, and he came and spoke with us. They also came to us and showed us some ideas about sort of trying to clean up the tailings.
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't had any really formal meetings at all since that change. And obviously we'd really welcome them because, the new minister's talked about the new Wittenoom Steering Committee, which we think is very important. And I think having the steering committee would help because Lorraine, obviously being a very intelligent person and understanding government, is that you need a plan. And it's one thing just to close it, but we still have the issue of the cemetery. And I wrote quite about that on my Facebook comment because how do you not have the discussion with the former residents and people of Wittenoom to say, what do you want us to do with your loved ones? If you're going to send bulldozers in there, allegedly, to bulldoze the buildings, well, surely you'd think about what you do with those.
Absolutely right. I'm talking to Melita Markey, the CEO of the Asbestos CEO Society. Melita, I've worked at this radio station for quite a while. And I remember Minister John Ford way back in the day moving, more decisively on trying to get the joint shut down, taking down signage, removing services, utilities from the town. That all happened probably 20 years ago, I suppose, 15, 20 years ago. We've got a statement from the state government today, Melita, and it doesn't say what's going to happen. It just says we can confirm the remaining resident of Wittenoom has vacated, and it says there's no safe level of exposure to asbestos. That is why the state government has moved to pass the Wittenoom Closure Act with the intent to remove any remaining structures in the town site, ensuring there'll be nothing left to visit in the Wittenoom asbestos management area. But it doesn't really say when, and there's still a road in and out, right?
Absolutely. And it doesn't really matter about the road. The vehicles, the four-wheel drives go there. I mean, the former residents have even put up their own little memorial at Mount Stevenson because they know that this is Australia's worst industrial disaster. It's the second in the world. I mean, if you go to I get friends sending me press from overseas saying Australia's Chernobyl. The Germans have come here and filmed a documentary on it to warn their people. The cover of the two little boys that is synonymous with Wittenoom playing in the tailings, both died in their 30s. That's on the cover of a book of disasters around the world in France.
Yeah.
They wrote to me and said, could we use that cover? So the whole world's knowing about it, but we're still not sitting there acknowledging it and acknowledging the people, that over 4,000 people that have been lost, and respectfully dialoguing with their representatives to talk to them. Asbestos Disease Society has been here since 1979, caring for people that those days, Simon, and probably a lot of your listeners would be aware of the history, the disease mesothelioma was not recognised in Centrelink or in the law. So people were dying and being called malingerers because they weren't going to work.
Yeah.
Terrible, terrible things. People couldn't afford food. So we stepped in to really fill that gap. And then over time we've built, the National Centre for Asbestos-Related Diseases with Bruce Robinson and a number of specialists.
Yep.
And that's been going now. That's the leading research centre, but it's not funded by the state government.
Yeah, so
it's funded by donations from the public.
So it does seem passing strange that the government doesn't have a plan that starts now that Lorraine has moved. I always thought it was a compassionate. It was compassionate to let Lorraine go on her own devices. Obviously, she was given a sort of a move on. Papers and processes were put in place to get her out of there. But it seems I would have thought the moment that she got on the Great Northern Highway, then the road would have been shut, a barrier would have gone across, and plans would have been made to move the folk in the cemetery, and away we go. But we're still none the wiser. Melita, thank you very much for thank you very much for talking to us today. Just very quickly, people who lived and worked in the town and worked on the mine, we know about them and how they've been impacted. Do you get a sense about visitations and tourists who've been impacted by mesothelioma?
Absolutely. We have a beautiful man who was a tour guide in the 90s who died of mesothelioma and left us a large part of his estate for medical research. He felt so bad, all the people he'd taken there on tourism jaunts. So what I would like to say to people while I've got the chance, if you were a tourist in Wittenoom in the 90s, please don't hesitate to call our organisation and register so we know who you are and we can help you keep an eye on your health. And lastly, with Lorraine, I would have liked to have seen a social worker managing Lorraine's case, not a bailiff, not a government worker, but a social worker. That's what we need for these people, Simon. This is what's missing, is the compassion and the planning.
Knowing Lorraine like I did, only fleetingly later, she was pretty tough and stubborn, so it might have been her call not to have one. But I do take your point, and let's hope
but for all the people, there's plenty of other people with families in that cemetery. It's not just about Lorraine. There's a lot of people, would you believe, suffering a lot of mental health issues. A whole round that Wittenoom, and we have pastoral care services here for those people because there's a lot of people, a lot of trauma. Imagine losing your mum and dad there.
Yeah.
Imagine losing 14 members of your family.
Well, you just also made me realise that I was a tourist there in the 90s myself, Melita. So, thank you for talking to us today, Melita. We must move on. We really appreciate it. Keep up the good work. Well done, Melita.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Melita Markey, the CEO of the Asbestos Diseases Society of Australia. So Lorraine has vacated her home, and we think she's gone to Headland with her daughter. The government are still a little vague on what they plan to do. Surely, once the cemetery thing is sorted, the road can be closed, hey? Stop people going in there.